Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Potez 630, a French heavy fighter coming at a tier of 1 and a battle rating of 1.7. To provide you with a brief historical overview as to the Potez 630, we begin thus. On the 31st of October 1934, the French Air Ministry issued a specification for a heavy fighter able to fulfill three main roles: fighter direction, bomber escort or interception, and night fighter operations. The plane needed to be able to reach a top speed of 450 km an hour, 280 miles per hour, at an altitude of 4,000 metres, 13,100 feet, and be armed with two forward-firing 20mm cannon for the offensive, backed up by a single rearward-firing machine gun for defence. Aeroplanes Henry Potez, or Potez in short, responded with the first design in what was to be known as the Potez 63 family, the Potez 630, an all-metal three-seater twin-tailplane design powered by a pair of 580 horsepower Hispano-Suiza 14 HPS radial engines. In parallel to this, Potez designed the Potez 631, which was the same aircraft effectively, but powered by the more powerful pairing of two Gnome 14N 1050 horsepower radial engines, but we'll cover that plane in greater depth when we get around to reviewing it. Back to the 630 then. Work on the initial prototype, the 630-01, started in April of 1935, and a year later the plane was to undergo its first flight as of the 25th of April 1936. Subsequent test flights highlighted the Potez 630 as being highly manoeuvrable, but undermined by two severely underpowered engines, as even when the engines were uprated to the final configuration of a pair of 700 horsepower Hispano-Suiza 14AB radial engines, the plane still struggled for performance, and that is the plane you're seeing on screen today effectively. But with the formation of the state-owned Société Nationale des Constructions Aéronautiques du Nord, or SNCAN for short, on the 23rd of December 1936, the Potez 630 was going to live on, as Potez found themselves quickly nationalised and merged into SNCAN on the 1st of February 1937, alongside other aircraft manufacturers. Soon after this, SNCAN received an order from the French Air Ministry for 10 experimental aircraft, 4 of these having to be Potez 630s. This was not desired by SNCAN due to the underpowered nature of the 630, their preference being the more powerful 631 and later Potez 63 variants. However, this was brought about by the low availability of the more powerful and reliable Gnome engine that powered the later 63 variants. In June of 1937 as a result, SNCAN were ordered to produce 80 Potez 630s and only 40 Potez 631s, this going to underline even more the low availability of the desired engine. And this was going to be the only French production order for the Potez 630, and with only 3 being ordered on the export market, 1 to Switzerland and 2 to Yugoslavia, a grand total of 88 Potez 630s were produced in all. The first production Potez 630 made its maiden flight in February 1938, with the French Air Force accepting Potez 630 deliveries as of May 1938. It is worth noting that some of these planes were initially armed with 4 7.5mm MAC 1934 machine guns in the nose instead of the two 20mm Hispano-Suiza HS-404 cannon that were promised, this being due to a shortage of cannon available. The plane was to officially enter service in September of 1938, but never see combat service, being withdrawn from frontline service in February of 1940 due to reliability issues associated with the Hispano-Suiza engines becoming commonplace. Instead, the plane was relegated to the role of a dual-control trainer aircraft up until the Fall of France in June of 1940. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the Potez 630 handles in War Thunder's arcade mode. Today's gameplay is brought to you from the Airfield Domination map Corsun using the following setup. Stealth belts are our 20mm offensive cannon, the reasoning here being that we want to use the belts that provide us with the maximum amount of damage possible when we hit a target, and by comparison with the other belts in my experience, the stealth belts enable this. We also have to consider that we want to use belts which enable us to get away with missing our foes when we're on their 6 in a boom and zoom pass, and the lack of tracer in these belts enables that by the fact our foes are not alerted to our presence with stream a tracer whizzing past their cockpit. Our gun convergence for our offensive arm is set to 500 meters, as is per the norm for armament based in the nose, whereby it's not convergence reliant, and our standard fuel load of 30 minutes is being obeyed here to ensure we can make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. As for our defensive 7.5mm machine gun, we have gone for the APT belt, whereby its single incendiary tracer and single armour piercing round work well together to bring down the less armoured foes that we'll face when we're the highest battle rating aircraft in the sky. Typically, the early monoplanes and the biplanes you'll encounter have exposed engines and fuel tanks, and these rounds will do a good job at messing those aircraft up over time. But typically we prefer to use our defensive armament merely as a warning indicator for when somebody's on our 6, alerting us as the pilot, and on top of that to deter or make those who are less confident turn away from pursuing us out to great distances. Having talked about our setup then, what about the climb rate of the Potez 630 for starters? Well, hopefully as you're seeing here, it is extremely poor and one of the weakest climb rates you'll encounter at your battle rating and tier, whereby it's even weaker than the likes of the CR714, which we reviewed a fortnight ago, link available in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now, if you want to see my review of that French fighter aircraft. But on the other hand, once you've got a bit of altitude over your foes, you can start to use one of the key strengths of this aircraft, which is its boom and zoom capability, to great effect, whereby your maximal dive speed of 797 km an hour, combined with your decent dive acceleration, means that you can actually latch onto foes in a boom and zoom pass very quickly and strike them down with your impressive dual 20mm cannon armament. We begin then on a MiG-334. They're unaware of our incoming presence, or are focused elsewhere we should say, and we're going to catch them by surprise here, opening fire at roughly 500 metres. Striking a number of hits, we knock them out of the game, and we latch onto a B-26B pea shooter, wiping them out very quickly for a double strike, before breaking off into the distance. Now note here how we're trying to obey straight lines wherever possible, because the energy retention of the Potez 630 when coming out of the dive is very poor, meaning that multiple aggressive manoeuvres, i.e. sharp turns or banks to the side, will cost you a huge chunk of your kinetic energy, and mean that you can gain very little altitude back or pull very little distance before the opposition will try to latch onto your 6. So you need to be careful on when you decide to change direction in your dive, because pick the wrong time and you may find that the opposition is already right there on your 6 and cutting into you. Now, having gone for a reload, what we should point out is the 180 cannon round available, or 90 per cannon, is enough, and it means that you can bring down multiple foes, as we're going to see time and time again here, without the need for a reload. Of course, you've got a rather long reload on 20mm cannon in general in War Thunder's arcade mode, which means taking reloads when the opportunities arise is always a welcome idea. Now, outside of that, what one has to consider as well is the central mounting of the 20mm cannon means that unless you go to extreme speeds, the cannon are accurate and easy to bring onto target, as long as your foe does not prove too difficult to hit, either jinking about all over the place, alternatively you don't misinterpret the amount of lead required, as I do right here on the MiG-315BK, before lining up the lead correctly for the second pass. Picking up another kill there, we latch onto the MS-410, showing how we can just follow the target and we only need a brief burst on target to rip them apart for our 4th kill. Now we loop over before trying to cut across the airfield to break away, but as we do so, we're going to bring down a Hurricane Mark 1 here for a triple strike on our ace in a day. And we can see another key strength of the Potez 630, and that is its hidden manoeuvrability, whereby not too many would think that perhaps this is an incredibly powerful turn fighter when given the opportunity to go 1 versus 1 against a large amount of its monoplane opposition. We saw there how the elevator is the strongest control surface of this aircraft by a huge margin, enabling you to loop as tightly as the likes of the F-2A Buffalo and the P-36 Hawk, something you perhaps would not expect with this plane. But outside of your elevator then, what about the other 2 control surfaces? Well, unfortunately, your roll rate is your weakest control surface domain, whereby your roll rate is rather slow and lacking. Changing direction on the fly, based on your ailerons, is not going to be your key get out of jail card in the middle of a dogfight, and means that a number of more manoeuvrable foes in terms of their roll rate will be able to shake you through constant directional change, particularly via rolling scissors. But in the middle ground you have a decent rudder, which enables you to conduct hammerheads very nicely at lower speeds and also conduct some rather nice flat rudder turns. But the elevator is where things are at. And if we now go onto your turn circle, what is interesting is you've got 2 turn circles in this plane, 2 distinct ones. One where you've got your flaps raised and one where you've got your flaps down in, say, combat or landing configuration. In combat configuration, you'll be able to turn more tightly than the likes of a Yak 1 or a CR714, and almost as tight as the likes of the Spitfire Mark 1A, although there is a distinct turn circle advantage to the Spitfire. What this means is, again, for the majority of the monoplane fighters you're going to encounter, you can turn fight with them adequately, because once the speed of the dogfight goes below 275 km an hour, you'll find that you actually hold your speed very easily and can keep building it up enough so you stay in the fight, as long as your foe does not take things into the vertical, but we'll talk about it at the end of the video. So instead, if things stay in the horizontal, you've got a great turn fighter capability. So long as the opponent does not go for a set of rolling scissors, then your lack of roll rate is going to hold you back. Now here we're lining up our third boom and zoom pass. As we're going to go into it, we actually notice a Heinkel 112A0 off on the fringe, and we decide to go head to head, and we're really going to commit to this head to head. Now so you may be thinking this must be a brilliant aircraft to do head to heads with. Well, not always, as we're going to see here, whereby we open fire, we don't judge it correctly, we drop our aim too low, and we only take some scratch shots back from the 20mm cannon of the Heinkel 112. Now you're probably wondering, why is that? Well, look at how thin and aerodynamic the fuselage of this aircraft is. It's actually a very difficult fuselage to hit in a head-on if you're aiming for the central section. And what this means is, effectively, this is a rather durable plane, because you've got a nice metallic airframe and you've got the ability to dodge a lot of fire due to how thin you are. The downside, however, is, and we'll see it right at the end of this video, is that the key weakness in terms of durability of this plane is the cockpit. If it's hit by anything, whether it be a 7.7mm machine gun through to a 20mm plus caliber cannon, the cockpit will be obliterated very quickly and your pilot is very likely to get knocked out, even with an increased vitality rating, I gather. And therefore, you want to avoid being shot at from above wherever possible, because it's not the aircraft that's going to fall apart, it's your pilot's life. Now going for another reload here, we're noticing that as we head out towards the fringe once again, that our team's offensive is really failing at this point, and the number of enemy aircraft over the airfield is increasing in a rather nasty fashion. So we're going to be a little bit more careful going into engagements now. And speaking of upcoming engagements, we have an MS-410 coming directly towards us, and they want a turn fight, so we're going to give it to them, because we have the tighter turn circle and the greater overall manoeuvrability at lower speed. Now as we go into this turn fight and we open fire with some head-to-head 20mm cannon as well, let's talk about low speed. What happens when you hit your 105 km an hour stall speed, which is an astoundingly low stall speed? Well, not too much. You do feel your stall effects start at approximately 155 km an hour, as we cut apart the MS-410 there, but it's not exactly a problem. All you need to do is get the nose down to a level position and build your speed up to 150 km an hour, at which point the Potez 630 will just carry on flying as per normal. But what this does mean is that because of how simple this plane is to handle at low speeds, all the way down to its stall speed, you can conduct some hilariously tight hammerheads on your rudder, whereby you pretty much hammerhead in place in the sky, or you can actually loop this plane over itself in a singular point in the sky. It's perhaps a little bit difficult to imagine, but just think how you literally will go up at one inclination, so you've got the belly of your plane pointed eastwards, and you'll turn the plane over so the belly of your plane is pointed westwards, and you haven't really changed your horizontal position in the sky, if that's the way of explaining it. Hopefully you get the picture. This plane doesn't really move about too much when it stalls, it just seems to nose down, build up a little bit of speed, and then just get on with the job once again. And it makes it a very enjoyable plane. Now at the other end of the spectrum, when you go from your ideal speed range, which is effectively 275 km an hour to 400 km an hour, if you can try to get into that speed range and you start to go to extreme speeds, what happens to your control surfaces? Well, your rudder experiences a 50% lock-up from 600 to 700 km an hour, your elevator experiences the same at exactly the same speed thresholds, and your roll rate drops off to the remaining 25% between 450 and 650 km an hour. So that's a gradual and rather nasty lock-up. But note there how you're not really punished for going to extreme speeds until you hit roughly the 600 km an hour mark. And here we cut down on an enemy Spitfire Mark 2A, trying to get them out of the game and off the 6 of our friendly bomber. But as we do so, we'll note that we're not too accurate this time. As we open fire, aim a little bit too high at the target despite us getting multiple sparks on them, and now we need to break away. But the Spitfire is a fast plane, and much like the preceding French aircraft you've flown in this one, it's no different in the fact it struggles to get away from opposition, with its straight line acceleration from stall to 300 km an hour being incredibly weak, even with the 110% engine boost. And as the game ends, in a frame drop there, we actually have our pilot knocked out, which is interesting because the kills are not credited to the opposition, And that's the way the game ends, and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. So with our 8 kills there, we picked up 16,603 silver lions and 1,804 research points. To defeat the Potez 630 in a given matchup then, there are 2 approaches in my experience. If you are flying a biplane or one of the very early monoplanes such as the D371 or the Heinkel 51, turn fight with this aircraft, get onto its 6 and harass it. Because you have to keep in mind that whilst this does have a defensive machine gun, you can very quickly eliminate the operator of that machine gun while the exposed cockpit of this aircraft, and you actually find a lot of the time you either take this aircraft down by knocking out its engines, or alternatively the more simple method is to knock out the pilot. And even when you're on this plane 6, the pilot seems quite exposed, as we saw right there at the end of that match where the Spitfire Mark IIA did knock out our pilot once the game had ended. The other approach, if you're flying a monoplane such as the Spitfire Mark IA, the Heinkel 100D1 and the Messerschmitt 19 ML1, is to simply use your superior climb rate in order to get above the Potez 630. If you can cause this plane to stall out in your wake and attack it from directly above, again you can wipe out the cockpit very quickly. Alternatively, you can bully this plane into submission over time, although you have to keep in mind its airframe is rather durable, meaning that you'll need successive passes to bring it down. But by avoiding such circumstances today, hopefully we've demonstrated the power of the Potez 630 in general, and that whilst it lacks overall engine power, even with the usage of its 110% engine overdrive, it really doesn't feel too much of a benefit. This plane, once it gets into an ideal position, and within both its ideal speed range of that 275 to 400 km an hour, and its ideal altitude range of 1,000 to 3,000 metres, where the plane just seems to pick up a little bit more, and you have the altitude width in order to be able to conduct your boom and zoom passes, you can really make this plane work. And if anything, it does happen to make me wonder what the Potez 631 is going to be like, because if this is an indicator, it definitely is a rather promising sign. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.